Well, my name is Alan Woodworth, and I'm a career ecologist and worked with various organizations and agencies, specifically with Walpole to help out with the life science inventory that we started back in the early 80s. I didn't actually become involved in this specific one until about 1986, and that's when it really got off the ground, and we spent the better part of the field season of the next 2 years doing as much as we could to cover the various prairies and the savannas. I was involved with further inventory aspects and species monitoring and various updates of the database, and I guess finishing off the draft life science inventory so that people here at the Heritage Center and within the community could have access to that information about what was out here in the landscape.
I'm Clint Jacobs. I've been working at the Heritage Center for about 20 years as a natural heritage coordinator and now supervisor. So the plant that we're concerned about is endangered white prairie gentian.
It's a plant that doesn't show up until later in the season. The photos behind me here clearly are fairly distinctive in their white characteristics. There are other gentians that look somewhat the same, but they're usually a different color, like bottle gentian, which is also a closed type gentian, but it's a very distinctive blue color. There are a couple of other plant species that look generally like this, so you have to look at some of the finer characteristics to determine that it's an actual gentian and not one of the other lookalikes.
There's cross breeding that's occurring between the bottle gentian and the white prairie gentian, and creating this kind of purplish tinged white hybrid plant. They're beautiful, but we don't know if that's a threat or not, whether or not there's going to be more of those than the parent white prairie gentian.
Historically, it was found in 2 other spots in Ontario. One place out near Peterborough in eastern Ontario, and the third place was in southern Essex County near Leamington. And both of those locations have been gone. The plant hasn't been seen in either of those locations for more than a century. So it was really quite exciting back in 1984 for some of the early botanical visits to the people to discover, and that was the first indication that there was anything like that here, of that nature here at Walpole.
And so Walpole Island's haven to lots of species and a lot of habitats. Our prairies, our savannas, our forest wetlands, and our waterways. We have a spiritual connection to these places. They've sustained our people for over 6,000 years.
I suspect because of the limited amount of habitat available in Ontario, and by the way, it doesn't occur anywhere else in Canada. It's just limited to Ontario in this one location. But even considering the amount of oak savanna habitat elsewhere in Ontario, I think it's going to always remain very limited, very restricted in its range, and even within the area that it occurs here in Walpole, it'll never become abundant, I don't think. Not in our lifetimes anyway, unless there's some major changes.
So the species is found in 3 spots on Walpole Island, as far as we know. Could be more. But some of those spots are not doing so well. One spot hasn't flowered, and there's one single plant that we found there that hasn't bloomed in over a decade, and we need to, it's been shaded out, and probably why it hasn't bloomed. So we need to focus on helping that habitat clear it up a little bit so that it gets more sunlight, and hopefully down the road it'll flower. Another location that's being threatened by hybridization, so it's hybridizing with the purple bottle gentian, which we don't know whether or not that's a threat or not, but that's why we have to kind of spend a lot more time studying this. The other location, there's just a handful of them that are found there, but they seem to be doing it well. The Walpole Land Trust actually helped purchase and protect that property, so it seems to be doing better than the other 2 properties. But there's still lots of work to be done. We can't get complacent and let it slip, and hopefully we can bring these other 2 sites up to better condition so the plants there survive and thrive.
I think in part it's because it's naturally at the edge of its range, and anything at the edge of its range, unless there's a change in the habitat that allows more of those types of things to come in, it's always going to be in low numbers. the human needs is always a significant factor in the loss of anything, and I think that's certainly the case here with this gentian.
The actions that we're taking fall under a 4-year agreement that we signed with Environment and Climate Change Canada. Been working at that agreement for almost 10 years. It's one of the first kind in Canada, actually the second signed in Canada. But it's going to enable us to do a lot of stuff. We want to be able to monitor the species over a long term, 4 years to start off with. But then we're looking at finding ways to protect the species, doing research in support of recovery efforts to help it flourish. We also want to care for and manage its habitat and deal with any threats that are impacting it.
I think the public should be aware of what it looks like and maybe how to separate it from its lookalikes so that it's more safe and secure. Even protecting the habitat is really important to maintain it as well as its other plant associates. And to be on the lookout for maybe other locations on Walpole. And just sort of, it's just one of those things where it's a pretty plant, but we shouldn't always base our decisions on its prettiness or lack of, but it's an important part of the natural flora that needs to be retained, and just have a respect, as I know many Walpole residents do, to try and retain it as much as possible, the general habitat, and hopefully species like white prairie gentian along with it. If people do come across this plant or something that they think might be this plant, I think that it's always tempting to collect it and bring it to somebody because it could possibly be this rare plant. I would say just make a really careful note of where it is and try and bring it to the attention of somebody here at the Heritage Center who definitely have an interest in it and can verify that's what it is, or say that it's one of the more common lookalikes that are still important in their own right, but at least they're not an endangered species.
Please give us a call. We haven't searched every corner of the island, so it's possibly more out there. Right now we know it's at 3 existing locations. If we come across it, give us a shout. We want to verify to see what we can do to help that species. Maybe it's in a good site, maybe there's some threats impacting it. So,
because it's a species that is part of the naturally occurring botanical elements of the prairies and the savannas, it's important to retain it. I think in any healthy habitat, the greater the diversity, the more stable the habitat is. And once things start to drop out of a habitat, then it becomes a slippery slope, and the habitats can undergo more major changes and suffer severely. So I think any way to keep the natural diversity that is here is probably better for the habitat as a whole, but also the species. Proper maintenance of prairie and savanna is the use of fire, and I know that can be controversial, but that's one of the reasons that Walpole has such fantastic prairies and savannas, is because of the long-term cultural use of fire, and it's really made a big difference.
Our role is to help this species and others. We have over 70 species at risk on Walpole Island, and we want to make sure that they survive and flourish into the future. And we're going to do it in different ways. A big part of it is getting back to our own cultural values and rekindling teachings that taught us that we all have a responsibility to all our relations, like this species. And so that's one of the goals, is through education we want to inform our younger people of their responsibilities, that in our creation stories, everything was created before us, and they were given instructions by the Creator to take care of everything and take care of us. And we were also given a message as well that we have to reciprocate that care. So now that's our goal, is to do that now. And because some of them are endangered, some of them are not doing so well. So we have to step in and help where we can. And I'm hoping that through education programs, through research and monitoring, through caring for its habitat, that we can help this species flourish into the future for generations to come.
I enjoy the continued relationship with the folks of Walpole, and specifically the Heritage Center. It's to be able to help out wherever I could, because prairie and savanna has always been near and dear to my heart. I've been involved with it one way or another for 35 years, and it's a great way to continue that level of interest and help out at the same time.
So there's going to be a lot of different things that we're going to do through this initiative under this conservation agreement. One of them is actually building capacity in the community to be able to continue doing research, continue doing monitoring. One of the reasons that we have this little video project going on is we want to train our younger people to be able to capture some video and share that with the rest of our community and others. We're training with folks from University of Windsor and others to help them build the skills necessary so that they can videotape, document, photograph the species, the work that's going on, and kind of tell the story of what we're trying to do and accomplish. And in the past, we put out newsletters that some community members read, but we want to capture a wider audience, and so that hopefully through these videos that more people know what we're trying to accomplish and possibly they can get involved.